Hi, this is Mike Mercier, and I'm the president of Screen Education. And this is a presentation I gave last week for the Ohio Educational Library and Media Association conference. And we had a glitch in the recording, so I am re-recording that talk so it can be posted for other members who might have missed it to see. So um, the talk is titled Your Leadership Role in Forging a Digital Wellness School Culture. And this talk is basically going to address things that schools can do, and specifically librarians can do, to take a leadership role in trying to address this rampant problem that we're seeing among young people and really people of all ages. But for you, it's people in your schools. This problem they're having with tech addiction or smartphone addiction, and the excessive use of screens that's resulting from that. So that's the talk is based upon research that I've done over 4.5 years on the issue of tech addiction, and this is a talk that I initially developed for teachers, and then I did an adaptation for administrators, and now I've done another adaptation for school librarians. So I'd like to begin by providing you with a little bit of background about me. So I just wanted to share with you that my interest in this issue of tech addiction stems to a great extent from my own personal experience. So if you look at this timeline, in 2014, August of 2014, so 6 years ago, I returned to a flip phone. So I'd been using a smartphone for several years, and I was so frustrated by it that I decided to go back to a flip phone, which I still have. And when I went to a flip phone, I actually experienced real withdrawal, like physical withdrawal, for 3 to 4 weeks. But since then, I've not looked back. And then 3 years ago, in October of 2017, I was able to get off Facebook. And I did that by deconstructing my profile. I knew if I just retired the profile that they hold it intact for 3 months. I knew within a few hours I'd open it up again. So I basically spent a full month messaging my friends, telling them I was going to unfriend them and giving them my email address, so they weren't. You say, don't be offended. I'm just getting off Facebook. I can't stand it anymore. So a lot of my insights initially came from my own personal experience. And then just briefly, I've been doing research on this issue of tech addiction for 4.5 years. And for the first 3 years, I did research with kids, and they ranged in age from 11 to 18 years old. Excuse me. And then for the last year and a half, I've been doing research with adults. So I've done studies with college students, parents, teachers, millennials, and then 3 studies with adults looking at the impact of tech addiction on the workplace. And this is a mix of national surveys, local surveys, small-scale surveys, and focus groups and individual interviews. So the topics I'm going to cover in the presentation, first I want to talk a bit about the causes of tech addiction. Then I'll get into the consequences. What are the negative consequences of spending so much time on screens because you're compulsively using the screen? Then I'll talk about what I call creating a digital wellness school culture. So that's the broad general approach that I have proposed that schools take to address the problem. And what I'm basically doing with this digital wellness school culture is applying an organizational change model to the school to change the culture of the school. And then I'll talk specifically about the role that librarians can play in being leaders in creating a digital wellness school culture. And then to prepare for this talk, I actually interviewed 5 librarians, and I got 2 case studies out of those interviews that I'll be presenting to you. So they're examples of It's from 2 librarians who actually took a leadership role in affecting significant change at their school. So in order for, I think, to talk about how we can address tech addiction, I think we have to understand what causes it. So that's what I'd like to walk through right now. This is a broad view of tech addiction that I've developed. And if you look at it, it's in the form of an equation, obviously. And if you look at the right side of the equation, that's the problem that results from tech addiction. So the problem that results from tech addiction is the excessive use of screens. And Common Sense, I assume you're familiar with Common Sense Media. Common Sense Media does a somewhat annual survey on this topic. And the last one that I saw was October of 2019. And they estimated that kids are spending 7 hours each day using their phones and other screens to access digital content that has nothing to do with school. So that's all mostly entertainment, recreational content, social media, videos, and games. So that's the problem on the right side. Ultimately, it's excessive use of screens. On the left side, we see the causes of tech addiction. And that's composed of 2 things. Number one, on the left, addictive content. So what we're finding is the content really is addictive. To say that another way, kids are compulsively using their screens. They're compulsively driven to access this digital content, and they can't control it. In other words, even when they recognize consciously that it's against their best interest and actually maybe thinking in their minds, I really want to do something else, they can't control themselves, and they're compulsively returning to the content, which is essentially the definition of addiction. And then the term on the right side, my whole point here is that we wouldn't have a problem with tech addiction if we had some limits on our ability to access the content, right? So one way to think about this is think back to when we accessed the internet mostly through dial-up, right? Tech addiction was not a huge problem back then because it was very difficult to access the content, right? But what we have now is we've taken the computer and shrunk it down to a tiny size that you can fit inside your pocket, and we've added wireless access, so you can essentially pull the computer out of your pocket at any moment, click a button, and you're online accessing this content. There are very few barriers to getting to the content. So it's that combination of things, right? Addictive content plus unrestricted access is resulting in the big problem, which is excessive use. So an obvious question is, what makes the content addictive? So I haven't done my own original research on this issue. I can't do brain research, right? But I've spent probably 10 to 15 hours reading the brain research related to like digital addiction. And from what I've come to understand about how the brain functions, right? Basically, what's happening is our brains, when we perform these behaviors online, the ones that are addictive, right? The games, the social media, the streaming video, and it essentially tricks our brains or fools our brains into believing that we're gratifying our basic human survival needs when we access the content. So we almost unconsciously feel that this is really helping us to survive. It's going to set us up to survive over the long term. And you've probably heard this term, dopamine hit, right? That's become sort of the shorthand for talking about tech addiction. You get a dopamine hit when you use social media, you get a like or whatever. So basically, when your brain perceives that you're doing something that's going to help you over the long term, it activates this dopamine reward center in order to make you feel good, so that you'll be inclined to repeat that behavior. So at a brief overview level, that's what is going on to drive the addiction. So I'd like to explore this a little bit deeper, like take the next step and go a little bit deeper with this. So if you look at our most basic survival needs, right? The fundamental things we need to survive. We need food, we need water, we need shelter, and we need to be able to protect or defend ourselves from predators, anyone who intends to harm us, right? So if those are the things we need to do to survive, then we have to, we have to have the capability of getting those things. So in more primitive times, we would have needed the ability to gather food on our own, get healthy, clean water on our own, build shelters on our own, and then fashion weapons to protect ourselves on our own, right? But as human societies have evolved, they become extremely complex, and really earlier in our evolution, right? We can go back to ancient times, Roman times, for example, and they had very complex societies. So to understand how we survive today, we really have to look at how we need to survive in a complex human society. So in order to meet our basic survival needs, we need to be able to succeed, not necessarily in being able to go fishing to get our food, right? We really need to be able to succeed doing other things in a complex human society so that we get the money to meet our basic survival needs, right? So the real skills for us are really here, navigating this complex human society. So what are the characteristics of a complex human society? On the left, we have that it's technologically sophisticated. So it's extremely sophisticated today, right? And it was sophisticated 2,000 years ago, right? But the Romans had complex technologies, really. But we know that year after year, our technologies get more and more sophisticated, more and more complex, and we need to be able to have the ability to learn the technical skills we need to at a minimum survive, or even better, thrive in our society, right? If we look at the middle point there, elaborate behavior rules that balance self and group interest. That's all about laws, right? So laws are designed and social norms, right? Laws and social norms, but laws are designed to keep our energies, our aggression energies, right? Self-interest in check and in balance, right? So we need to balance self-interest with group interest to keep order, stability, right? So we need to have the ability to check our behavior, right? And comply with laws and rules if we want to thrive in this society. And then on the right, we have complex hierarchical social organizations. So, if you look at any type of social organization in our society, whether it's a school or government or a business, right? There's a complex hierarchy, and we need the skills to know, where we fit in the hierarchy and know what the limits are for our position in the hierarchy, where we can push the limits, how to get along with others so we don't alienate them, how to behave so we can ascend in that social organization. So, this is a sort of a broad view of, to exist and thrive, to survive in a complex human society, to be able to buy our food, water, shelter, and afford our protection. We need to be able to navigate this complex society and have the skills or abilities to succeed in this type of complex society. So here's a sort of flow chart or process chart that shows sort of like the levels of things we need to do to be successful, right? So we need to, on the left side here, take our implicit human drives and channel them, right? So I'm talking about the drive to compete, right? The drives that allow us to navigate the complex society. So the drive to compete, the desire to excel, the innate drive to master new skills, the innate drive to learn, the innate drive to connect with others socially, and to ascend in social status. the drive to create narratives or stories and share them with others, but also to take in other people's stories as a way to connect and learn. And we channel these drives into the middle point here, which is to develop skills and abilities. So we take these drives, we channel them to develop skills and abilities that we need to succeed in our complex society. And then on the right there, we use those skills to achieve tangible goals. And this is essentially what allows us to survive. And these, when we do any one of these things, whether it's, channeling our drives, channeling that energy, succeeding in developing a new skill, or the sub steps, developing smaller skills that build up to a larger new skill, or achieving goals. If you think about it, it's when we do one of these things, we get that dopamine hit, right? We feel good, right? So this is sort of how the brain has been engineered. It's saying when you do any of those things, right, you're going to feel good, and that's going to reinforce that behavior, and we're going to try to get you to repeat it because it's helping you survive in the long term. And now we get to dopamine. Dopamine plays a role in making you feel good to reinforce those behaviors that help you survive. So what is dopamine? It's a brain neurotransmitter, and it generates feelings of pleasure and satisfaction. And there are basically four major specific channels where you'll find dopamine being released. So that's essentially what's going on with dopamine. We exhibit those, things that I mentioned, channeling our drives, developing skills, and achieving goals, right? When we accomplish one of those things, dopamine is being released into one of the dopamine channels to make us feel good and reinforce the behavior. And the dopamine, I mentioned these dopamine channels, right? The channels are basically connecting different brain centers, and these brain centers are involved in reinforcing, making you feel good and reinforcing the fact that what you just did is going to help you survive. So we want to do more of it, right? So if you look here, I've got some of the brain centers involved. One is a center that senses we're meeting our survival needs. Then there's a center that generates the feelings of pleasure and psychological reward, and reinforces, behaviors. It's sort of like learning that this was a good behavior. And then on the bottom, there's a center where we plan our behavior. You've probably heard of the prefrontal cortex, where we have our executive function. So that's really what I'm referring to there. It's the center of the brain that says, we want to plan our behavior so that we are doing things that benefit us. And there's a dopamine connection between that survival center that says, oh, you just did something that's going to help you survive, and the pleasure center in the middle there. And then between the survival center and the prefrontal cortex, where you have the executive function. And it's all working together to say, okay, you just did something that's going to help you survive. Good job. Really feel good. Learn this behavior. Repeat it. And then the prefrontal cortex is saying, yeah, I'm gonna reorient myself so that I'm encouraging you to seek out that behavior again, because it's going to help you in the long run. So this is just a diagram showing three of these dopamine centers. There are really three that are involved in addiction, 3 out of the 4. And the big ones here, it's the pink, so it's the mesolimbic. That's the pleasure, the one that recognizes rewards, right, and says, oh, that feels good. That was a good behavior. You want to learn that, repeat it, get better at it. And then the blue, which is the mesocortical, which is the prefrontal cortex, the cognitive area, right, where the executive function resides, right? So that's connected to the survival center too. So, if you look at our evolution, right, through normal human times, uh, we when we did those things, channeled our drives, learn new skills, accomplish goals, right? Those things weren't happening, 80 times a day. So we weren't getting these dopamine hits, just constantly, right? It was a much less frequent thing, right? So we got the dopamine hits periodically, and it took a lot of work, right, and labor, to learn a new skill, right? Think about playing a sport, right? Say someone who plays football, you're going to have the season is 2 to 3 months out of the year. You're going to have one game a week during that season, 12 games, and the rest of the time you're going to be not playing football or practicing for a month or two before the season starts, practicing during the week, right? So you can see if the big dopamine hits come from doing well in a game, that's going to happen once a week, right? If you do well in the game and feel good about it, right? You will get some intermediate hits. Someone will compliment you on your ambition, or you're working hard, right? That'll feel good. You learn a new skill during practice during the week, that's going to feel good. But my point is that it's not like with phones where you're getting hits all day long, if you see my point. So if you look at this slide, what it's basically saying is, just like with drugs, okay, technology is hijacking these dopamine channels. So if you look at the middle point here, with drugs like cocaine, what drugs are doing is saying you don't have to do any work at all. The only work you have to do is to inhale this drug, and we're just going to mechanically flood the dopamine channels, right, with dopamine. So you're going to feel really good very quickly. You don't have to do a thing, right? And then on the bottom point there, with technology, it's hijacking in the same way. But the thing is, what's really going on here is we're accomplishing these goals. We're channeling our energies, developing skills in a virtual world, the virtual skills, and our accomplishments are in the virtual world. And some of them might bleed over to the real 3D world, but most of them just stay in the virtual world, right? And we're able to access these experiences so frequently throughout the day that it's really hijacking us. We're just getting a constant dopamine hit. So especially with social media, you post up to social media, every time you get a like on a photo or a comment, you're getting a dopamine hit. It's social approval, which is saying, look, I can sense you're doing well here and that you're really thriving socially. Let's keep it up, So that reinforces the behavior of posting more things to try to get more approval online. And you get it frequently and quickly with relatively little effort. So that's the essential problem with the phones being addictive. Another characteristic of digital content that makes it or reinforces addiction is that it's essentially hyper customized. So with all these platforms, whether it's a game, video channel like YouTube or social media, it's because it's hyper customized to meet our deep interests and passions, right? So you think about a social media platform, you're customizing it. So you're choosing your friends, you're choosing the groups you like, you're choosing the games you like, you're choosing the pages you like, right? And you're basically setting it up and engineering the platform so that it's continuously delivering to you an endless stream of content that's appealing to your most personal interests. You set up these interests, right? So that it becomes very efficient in giving you a dopamine hit, put it that way, right? And that's another reason it's difficult for people to put it down or walk away from it, because of this hyper customization. The complement to that too also is that the tech companies, we know, use algorithms to read your interests, and then they push more content to you that appeal to your interests. And another factor that contributes to this, addiction and continuously going back to the content is that there's just essentially an infinite amount of content out there. You can just, endless, whether it's a game, with a game you have an infinite number of players around the world that you could play with instantly, right? It's not like setting up a tennis match where you both have to want to play at the same time, and you have to, it might be 4 days before you can get together because your schedules don't match up, and then you have to find courts. You can't play at 2 in the morning when you want to, even if you want to. You can't find illuminated courts, or you can't find a club that's open. But because we're playing games online, there's an infinite millions of people around the world that we can play with in a moment. We always have a partner to play instantly. So that's another issue here. You can just meet your needs or your desires whenever they emerge instantly through these addictive platforms. And finally, digital platforms, they employ gamification principles, which again make the content more addictive. So I'll give you an example with Snapchat, the streaks feature, right? So think about what's going on with streaks, right? It becomes a goal that you want to achieve to have exchanged messages with a given person for as many possible days in a row as you can. Now, that goal didn't exist until Snapchat applied gamification principles to it. In other words, until they started to count the number of days, right? It's almost like a random goal, right? Who would have thought, like, oh, we got to keep communicating every day, but it's become like this artificial goal. And it was so bad, 4 years ago when I started doing research with kids at summer camp, I had kids telling me that they were giving their friends or their parents their passwords so that they could keep their streaks going. I mean, it was unbelievable, So that's another factor here, the gamification of the platforms. So before we move on to the next section, I just want to just summarize, going back to our model, just to remind you, again, the problem here on the far right is excessive use of content, 7 hours a day, according to Common Sense Media. And that's the result of the combination of addictive content and the fact that kids have unrestricted access to the addictive content, which allows them to just go back to the content whenever they want to. So the reason that this excessive use of digital content is a problem is that it's hurting kids on many different levels. And that's what I'd like to talk about now. What are the many ways in which the 7 hours a day are really hurting our kids? So here this is a taxonomy I've created. So I assume you've seen articles over the last 3-4 years since the media started really covering this issue. And you've seen articles or news items about research on the problems that tech addiction is causing. Any one of those findings could be categorized under these categories. So we have social, emotional, cognitive, physical, neurological, and then productivity problems. If we look at the social problems, there are a lot of social consequences resulting from all this time online. So number one, at the top, kids don't socialize in person as much as they would like to. So that they have a hunger, they're being starved basically for face-to-face connection with other people, with their friends. As a result, they're just spending more time alone and isolated. We know that they're also experiencing a lot of social anxiety. This is something that's been remarkable to me doing research with both the kids, the 11 to 18-year-olds, and the college students. I am struck by how many times I've heard junior high school kids, and then college students self-label or self-identify as suffering from social anxiety. They use that label on themselves. So it really is, just my anecdotal experience is it's a serious problem, and it's widespread with kids. And then on the bottom here, they don't get to know others nearly as well as they do when they spend time together face to face. This is just some data from research that I've done. So this data comes from two national surveys I did with kids. Each survey had over 1,000 respondents, and the age range was 11 to 16 on one of them, and then 13 to 18 on the other. But if you look at the top there, the bottom line here is that socializing online is crowding out face-to-face socializing time. So if you look at the top statistic, 33% said that they spend more time socializing with their close friends online than they spend in person. So a third of kids are saying, I spend more time socializing online than I do face-to-face with my good friends. The middle point there is 69%, so just over 2/3, wish they could spend more time socializing in person. So I mentioned there was a hunger to spend more time with their friends face-to-face. So over 2/3 wish they could spend more time socializing with friends face-to-face. And then the bottom statistic, even the point there is that even when kids get together face-to-face, the technology is still an obstacle to having deeper connections. So 52% said that when they spend time with friends, with close friends, say on the weekends, they spend a substantial amount of time. There are periods of time where they spend a substantial amount of time sitting together in silence in a group, staring at their phones. I mentioned there are emotional consequences, so we know that measures of, since about 2012, measures of anxiety, depression, and suicide have been increasing among teens. And we've also seen that there are increased feelings of isolation. So these are emotional consequences resulting from spending so much time on screens and relating to people through screens. This is more data from our surveys. So what we're trying to do here is measure just how toxic and negative is the emotional tone online. So 36% say they witness cyberbullying every week. 31 have seen cyberbullying result in physical violence ultimately. 45% witness drama online every single day. So almost half every day they see drama. And then 38% witness, I can't read that because my picture's in the way. Gossip, yeah. 38% witness gossip every single day online. This is sort of looking at the effect of this toxic experience. So you see at the top here, 89% become upset when they witness cyberbullying. So there's an emotional cost to them. It's upsetting. 57% they're disturbed when they witness gossip. And then on the bottom, we figured out from some of the focus groups that a lot of the things that are upsetting them are fear that it's going to happen to them. So 42% say that they fear being gossiped about online. This is sort of a summary statistic on just how bad it is. We asked, do you feel that social media contributes to conditions that can result in school shootings? So do you think it's a factor that causes school shootings? 73% said yes. So that's like a summary of how toxic it can be in the online social environment for kids. And then we're seeing cognitive consequences. So, the shortened attention span. So what's happening there in a way is that that executive function is reorienting itself. Instead of around a long-term behavior timeline, it's more of a short-term behavior timeline, so it can get these artificial rewards online so frequently. Related to that over here is diminished executive function, which we discussed, which is related to the shortened attention span, but having less of an ability to gratify short-term pleasures of like getting the likes on social media at the cost of longer-term accomplishments that really are going to help you succeed, right? Like doing well in school. And then, of course, these are all related, right? Greater impulsiveness, which is related to the shortened attention span, diminished executive function. So they're all kind of related. Physical consequences, we're seeing studies in the last few years have shown, kids have greater neck strain, eye strain, unhealthy diets because they're ignoring their healthy eating habits. Especially, I've heard from gamers that's the case because they literally don't want to get up from their computer playing the games. diminished physical exercise, which is related, and then there are sleep problems. This is from one of our surveys on, we asked about sleep. So if you look at the top here, 80% said they spend time on their phones after they go to bed. And then on the bottom here, we broke that out. We asked how much time, and you'll see a full 22% said they spend 2 or more hours or greater than 2 hours. And if we break that down, half of those, so it was 11%, said 3 or more hours they spend on their phone after they go to bed. 18% said they spend about 1 to 2 hours, and then 22% it was 30 to 60 minutes. And then we're seeing neurological consequences. So the National Institutes of Health is finding that tech addiction prematurely thins the cerebral cortex. And they're attributing that to the use of technology. They've come out and said they don't know if this is a real problem, right? They said that the prefrontal cortex naturally thins as we age, but it's thinning, I believe it was a couple years earlier with young people. And they believe it's as a result of the overuse of screens. And then on the bottom there, we already talked about that, it overstimulates dopamine channels. And then finally, there's the problem with productivity. So we're finding that kids are less productive in really every realm of their lives. So we're finding in our research, they're not doing the chores that they say they should be doing. They're not doing the homework that they should be doing. And even when they do their homework, the phones are interfering with the homework. They're less productive at school because they're distracted during class time. It's impacting their social development and then their development of personal interests. And I just want to share a little bit of detail on that. In terms of academic productivity, again, from one of our surveys, at the top, 41% of teens say that phones are obstacles to getting the best grades they're capable of getting. So they're basically saying with grades, I know that my phone is not allowing me to achieve my potential academically. They're admitting that. 41% are admitting that. And I have to assume that there's another percentage, right, another group where that's true, but they're not admitting it, or they don't realize it. In the middle, 72% witness others, say they witness other people using their phones in class every single day, and that was for social media, streaming videos, and playing games. And then on the bottom, we asked them to estimate how much time they spend per hour, or how many times they check their phone every hour, right, when they do their homework. The estimate on average was 9 times per hour. So that's every 6.5 minutes. Kids estimate they check their phone while they're doing their homework. And we know that they're getting, going on digressions, right, every a few of those times, right? So we know that, if it's 9 times an hour, say 2 of those easily, they're getting drawn in for 5, 10, maybe longer, 15 minutes. So homework time is extremely unproductive. Let's put it that way. It hurts productivity at home. On the top here, we asked how often do you end up not doing something that you actually want to do, that you'd enjoy, because you can't put your phone down. 30%, so almost a third, said every single day. There are things that I would like to do that I don't do. And then 35%, we asked them, how often do you end up not doing something you should do because you can't put your phone down? And then 35%, so just over a third, said every single day. There's something I'm supposed to do or I should do that I end up not doing because of my phone. So the bottom line here is that the kids' human energy is being siphoned off, right? So the human energy they used to channel into real world accomplishment, 7 hours a day, it's being siphoned off into virtual world accomplishment. And to say that another way is, if you look at all these problems and take them in aggregate, they're squandering a lot of their human potential. I would say that that's really what's going on. We're allowing our kids to squander much of their human potential so that they can achieve things virtually. Um, but there is some good news here, and that is that my research has actually found that kids are frustrated by this. They're aware it's going on, they're frustrated by it, and they want to do something to address it. So we found 65% of teens say they wish they could self-limit their screen time. And then related to that, 69% said they'd be happier if they could spend less time on their screens. And 68% said that they've actually tried to limit their screen time. So the point here is that they're showing that they want some relief from this. 2/3 about want relief. Some of them actually just outright want to be rescued. So at the top, 26% say they wish someone would impose limits on their screen time. And on the bottom, we asked kids if their school has a ban on phones. And of those that said, yes, my school bans phones, we asked whether they're glad or frustrated about this. Over half said they were glad that the school bans phones. This was a remarkable statistic. So I mentioned one of our, that we do a lot of research with kids at camp. So one of the national surveys we did with kids with 1,100 respondents, it was kids who attended overnight summer camps that don't allow phones. And the average in this survey was 4 weeks. So these are kids going 4 weeks without any tech access. And we asked them to rate, on a scale of 0 to 100, rate the magnitude of gladness you experienced at the fact that you couldn't access technology. And then we asked them to use the same scale, 0 to 100, to rate the magnitude of frustration they felt at not being able to use technology. And you can see at the top, their gladness they rated at 82 out of 100. Their frustration they rated at 20 out of 100. So their gladness at not having tech access is 4 times greater than any frustration they feel. That's a phenomenal number. It's basically saying we're thrilled to get a break from our phones at camp. So here's the bottom line. I want to present that data to you right there because I feel that, for anyone, right, myself, and I try to make this point with teachers too, that knowing that kids are frustrated by their tech addiction, my hope is that it emboldens you, right? It emboldens me, right? It basically can serve as a source of motivation to say, I have a right to try to address this problem, because they want help, So that was the point of that. Now, the question becomes, if society is going to address the problem of digital addiction, should schools be the ones to address it, or should they take a role in addressing it? And my personal response to that is, well, obviously if they want to, but here's why they might be motivated to do this. The school staff, teachers, librarians, administrators, they witness every day the problems, right? So they see kids distracted in the classroom, performing poorly on tests. They know a lot of it's related to the tech problem at home and not being efficient in class and not being efficient doing homework. They see kids experiencing social tensions and have to deal with that. They see kids exhibiting emotional distress from being bullied and gossiped about. They see kids deprived of sleep. I had a teacher I worked with who could tell there were a couple of kids in his class that gamed, and he said he could tell if they were up till 3, 4 in the morning, and he'd ask them, and it was often like 3, 4, 5 in the morning. They'd be up playing games, and then they'd go to bed for 2 hours and go to school. Or, they see kids not handing in homework. So schools witness these problems and see them clearly, and it affects the school environment negatively. Over the last 4.5 years, speaking to educators, I've gotten a lot of feedback and reactions on how educators view this issue of tech addiction and whether schools should address it. So on the left side here, I've had those people say, well, it's not a problem. They're digital natives, and this is just the new normal. It seems like a problem to us because we're adults and we didn't grow up with this stuff. But for kids, they're natives, and it's just the new way. So my response to this reaction is, well, my research is showing that's not the case. The kids are frustrated by this, right? They want to change, right? They want to be able to set limits, and it makes them feel bad that they can't, and they're aware that it's causing all these problems for them. The middle point here is there are those who say, yeah, it's a problem, and schools really should address it. And the common approach is implementing a phone ban. I find when a school really wants to address it at the administrative level, it's the phone ban that they implement. And then on the right, There are those who say it's a problem, yeah, but we're not going to address it. We have to leave them to figure it out on their own, um, because they're going to face this challenge as adults. And my response to that is that my research with adults is showing that that's not the case. The adults are having the same problems that the kids are having. And I just want to share a couple of brief numbers with you so you can really see. We've done 3 surveys with adults on the impact on tech addiction at work. So you'll see here on the left, we asked people to estimate how much time they personally spend every day at work using technology to access content that has nothing to do with their jobs. So they're estimating that they're spending 1.4 hours, that they themselves are spending 1.4 hours. Then on the right, we're asking them to estimate how much time other people in their workplace are spending every day. And the estimate jumps to 2.5 hours. So we believe what's going on is that they're underestimating their own negative behavior and then projecting it onto other people. So we believe the actual average is close to the 2.5 hours a day. But you could average the two and say it's around 2 hours a day. But 2 hours a day, grown adults aged 18 to 75 are spending 2 hours a day at work accessing content that has nothing to do with their work. And what we're finding here is that it's hurting productivity. So 87% say it's hurting their company's productivity. 14% say accidents have occurred in their workplace because people were distracted by their phones. And we're seeing things like in industrial settings, like an arm being crushed in a press, someone losing fingers because the machine operator was playing on their phone, a forklift running over someone's leg because the forklift driver was on their phone, things like that. It's damaging property, injuries, and in some cases deaths from these accidents. And 60% say that people at their workplace express frustration over others wasting time on their phones. So it's creating social tension and conflict. And then, kind of like the kids, the employees are saying, even though they're the ones, spending so much time on their phones every day willingly, they're saying that employers should have rules restricting the amount of time you can use personal tech at work. So the adults at work are saying basically we need someone to set limits, just like the kids are saying. So if we're going to address this problem, what's the goal? I mean, generally speaking, what is the goal? The goal is to reduce digital content consumption. And I want to go back to the equation. So again, we want to address this problem, the excessive use of screens, right? We know it's the result of the fact that the content is addictive and we have unrestricted access to it, right? So if we want to reduce the variable on the right side of the equation, we have to reduce one or both of these to keep it equal. And we know that we can't make the content less addictive. We have no control over the content. All we can do is control access to the content. So that's basically, if we want to address this problem, this is where we have to focus on restricting access to the addictive content. And you can do that in 2 ways. You can impose limits on people. So we can impose limits on the kids' screen time and enforce them, right? It's beyond their control. We're going to impose limits on them. And on the right, at the same time, we can help them develop the ability to self-limit screen time. So my belief is that to address this problem, we have to they're complementary, we have to do both. So in the short-term solution is to impose limits. And then the long-term solution is to, over time, help kids develop a greater ability to self-limit screen time. So this brings me to this idea of creating a digital wellness school culture, right? So if we assume schools have a right and an ability, they want to address the problem, right? It's something they want to do. And if the goal is to find ways to impose limits on kids' screen time, but at the same time help them develop the inner ability to self-regulate, self-limit their screen time, how can a school do this? The most prescriptive way to do it, the most direct way to do it is to have a plan that you implement, right? And that's what I'm calling this digital wellness school culture. It's creating, intentionally implementing a program to change the culture at the school so that the kids are uh, learning to self-limit, but also have some limits placed on them. So here's a culture model, and I mentioned at the beginning that what I'm basically doing here is applying an organizational change model to the school, so a culture change model. And what are you doing with changing culture? You're basically integrating into the existing culture. Now you could totally redefine the culture, but what I'm proposing is you integrate into the existing culture, just integrate this new virtue, which is that we need to spend less time, less than 7 hours a day, accessing recreational, entertainment, social, digital content. And if you look at this model, it's comprised of 6 components. So this would involve, setting rules, articulating values, giving kids experiences, creating traditions, institutionalizing changes, and then educating them. So if we look at rules, the rule would basically be setting a standard of behavior that we expect kids to meet, right? So it's spending less time on screens for recreation purposes, however the school decides to define that. It could be you want to restrict that to the classroom, right? You can set the limits in many different ways, right? But having some sort of standard of behavior to limit screen time, and having consequences if they break the rule. Values. What this is about is basically articulating this value in words, and then very consciously and explicitly integrating it or adding it to the school's current list or menu of values or virtues that they hold to be the most important, right? So it's really, putting it into words. It could be, putting it into the handbook, having something that's reading material at the beginning of the year. It could be something that's put into words on posters throughout the school, something that teachers talk about, that administrators talk about. You get the point. It's an explicit way to express this new value and virtue, and make it clear that it's part of this. That it's a new piece that we're adding to the existing set of values at the school. Giving kids experiences. What I'm talking about here is this is based upon my experience of going camping and the research I did with the college students and the kids, where they go through deprivation experiences, right? Digital deprivation, social digital detox experiences, where they don't have access to tech over long periods of time. And the reason this could be critical is it helps awaken people to the problems that the tech is causing them. They migrate to a new state of mind, and then they look back, at their formerly tech-saturated mind state, and they realize, wow, I feel so much better without being in that state. I can't believe my priorities are different. My perspective was distorted when I was so saturated with technology. So my point is that these, tech deprivation experiences help to awaken people, and they can be transformational. They can give people the motivation they need to make changes in their behavior in terms of tech use. Traditions. This is just a way to symbolically highlight this new virtue, right? This new value. I'm not going to prescribe traditions. It could be, I'll just give you one example. It could be something that's done in freshman orientation, right? That could be one type of tradition. Something that they do that's symbolic, that says this is a high priority. Now that you're starting at this school, starting high school, this is a priority for us. We want to imprint this in your mind, and then you could have 1 or 2 other traditions that repeat or reinforce that, that everyone experiences, not just the freshmen. Institutionalize this virtue, and I'm thinking, an example that I have for that is to find someone within the district or at the school who can take on the responsibility and the title. It can become part of their title, right? But Director of Digital Wellness, for example. So that is tremendous institutional value in terms of signaling to everyone that this is a critical value that we hold at this school. And then education, the point there is to help help kids intellectually grasp and understand the reason that this is being done. So help them understand the problem of tech addiction, the nature of it, give them language and concepts for understanding how it hurts them, and then help them understand how the approach that you're taking in this digital wellness culture initiative is going to benefit them and address the problem. And something to keep in mind here is that when you implement culture change, we understand that all stakeholders in the organization have to play a role, right? So to implement a program of culture change, all school stakeholders can play a valuable role in doing this. So I'm talking about the whole menu of, students, staff, which would include coaches, librarians, teachers, administrators, and then parents. All of those stakeholders can play a role. So now the question is, how can librarians take a leadership role in addressing this problem? And the way to think about this is, initiatives or responsibilities can be assigned to you, right? So if you're at a school where they're implementing change, like a phone ban, right? You might have some responsibility assigned to you, right? But then there are other things you could do that aren't assigned to you that you initiate. So I want to be clear that what I'm talking about when I talk about in this presentation, librarians taking a leadership role, I'm talking about the right side here. It's not someone giving you this responsibility. It's you seizing the responsibility, right? Seizing the initiative to do something that is not being asked of you. And when you do that, when anyone initiates something, right? Whatever they plan on doing, it can either lie within their job responsibilities or it could lie outside their job responsibilities. And both are valid, right? The question is if it's outside your formal job responsibilities, right? If it doesn't fit in any way, it's might be a greater challenge to accomplish it. But what I'm talking about today could be either, right? You could do something that's well within the formal traditional responsibilities of a librarian, or you could decide what I want to do is outside that, and I'm going to see how I can pull it off. One thing I want to mention is in terms of doing things within your, an initiative that's within your job responsibilities, your current job responsibilities. There's this whole theme of that many librarians have responsibility for. It's teaching about digital literacy, digital safety, digital citizenship, and I just want to make the point that the theme of digital wellness fits neatly in with those. So that might be a way to think about this, right? If you feel like it's going to be a challenge, right, in terms of getting people to buy in, this could be a good rationale for saying, well, this really fits in with what I'm doing. Digital wellness is closely related to these other digital issues that I already deal with and teach about and try to influence people about. I want to talk a little bit about generating ideas for initiatives. So you might just have an idea, which is great, right? But I also want to give you a couple of frameworks that will maybe stimulate you to think of something you might not have thought of, right? So just very briefly here, one way to think about your initiative would be to determine the level at which you want to have an impact, right? So it could be you want to have an impact at the library level. It's the people that use the library. You could decide I want to have an impact at the classroom level. So I have an initiative idea that would really be implemented at the classroom level, right? And that's what I want to do. It could be something that's school-wide, could have a wide impact on the entire school. And in a way, you could argue that's something you do in the library. If everyone uses the library, that could be a school-level impact. But there might be something else that has nothing to do with the library where you want to have a school-level impact. And then, of course, the bottom point here is that the community level. So this would be a really big initiative that affects all stakeholders, including like the parents. Another way to think about, come up with ideas would be to think about these components of culture, right? So your initiative could have to do with setting rules. It could involve articulating, putting into words the values this new value of spending less time on screens. Could be a way to provide experiences that take kids away from screens and help them to get distance from them and look back and reflect on how the screens are affecting them. Could be some kind of traditional idea you have. Could be an idea for institutionalizing change, or it could involve just straight education. And then finally here, you can think about, derive ideas if you think about which stakeholder group you want to impact. It could be that your idea involves students solely, or it could be something where you want to influence staff so that they influence students. It could be you want to influence administrators to take some kind of action at their level. Excuse me. Or it could be that you want to influence parents. And then strategies for success. These are just things to think about. These are insights I've gained from talking to some librarians who have done initiatives, or dealing with teachers in schools that have done initiatives. But one of the things you got to think about is identifying limits that you might have to overcome to put through your initiative. Getting buy-in from stakeholders. So you got to be aware of who you need to influence to make sure that what you're doing is acceptable and you'll have support, right? Enlisting help and support from other people. There might be people that could actually contribute to this. You might want to partner with them, or they might just be a resource that's willing to help you in your initiative. Making people aware of what you're doing. So that's something I heard from the librarians I talked to is, communication, promotion of what you're doing so people are aware of it. And then the bottom point there is people seem to think it was critical to advertise your success whenever you have a success to reinforce the value of what you're doing. Now, I mentioned that I had some case examples from my interviews with librarians, so I wanted to this is the final part of the presentation. I wanted to present those case examples to you. I want to go back to this slide. I said that when you initiate projects on your own, right, they could lie within your job responsibilities or outside. And it just so happens, by chance, the two examples I have fit each of those categories. So there were, on the left, there was a librarian who initiated what she called No Tech Tuesday in her library. And that lies within her responsibilities as a librarian. And then there was another one who did an initiative that was outside of her job responsibilities. And she actually initiated and was able to push through the implementation of a school-wide phone ban at the school. So if we look at the first case study, the No Tech Tuesdays, her situation was that she was new to this high school, and during her interview, she actually discussed her desire to use the library in different ways, to be creative and innovative and think outside the box. For her initiative, she had to get approval from 4 administrators. She said 3 were very excited about it. 1 was actually opposed, but she was able to ultimately get approval because of the 3 who were excited about it. Now, so what was No Tech Tuesday all about? Well, it was once a month on a Tuesday. There was no tech permitted in the library, and students could come in and do their homework or, study or whatever, but they couldn't use a laptop or a phone or an iPad or a tablet. So she provided them with activities that they could do. So she gathered up, like coloring books. I believe she got a money allocated to get some of these items. She got Legos and board games, and she also created a project. She called it the Make It, Take It project, and it was often like a STEM challenge. So an example she mentioned was having kids build, like I think a helicopter or something like that, using the materials that she had. She said she did lots of research to find projects that kids would be interested in completing. And she actually had to she found she had to encourage a lot of students when they were doing the projects to finish them. They would often give up early. So a lot of her effort on No Tech Tuesday was, interacting with individual students to push them and encourage them to keep going with the project and not give up on it until they finished building what they were trying to build. And she also said that part of the program was to offer to teachers that a reward they could give kids in their class would be leaving class early to attend No Tech Tuesdays, or she invited them to bring the whole class down. Excuse me. She said that very few teachers actually got involved, but she knows other people. She said she actually got this idea from other schools, and she knows of other schools where, in some cases, the teachers really did get involved in No Tech Tuesday. She talked about how communication was really critical here, and said that she regularly emailed teachers to let them know what was going on for every upcoming No Tech Tuesday. She was constantly inviting teachers to participate, and then she was able to advertise her successes through emails. And the signs of success that she talked about were having a high participation rate. She talked about how many kids would come on No Tech Tuesday. It became very popular. Second point there, she said kids would come in and just ask when the next No Tech Tuesday was. And she said that some kids would actually come in on the wrong Tuesday and wonder where all the building materials were. So they were that enthused about it. If you look at just assessing this case study, her level of impact was really with library patrons and the school. So that's the level at which she impacted her initiative had impact. If you look at the components of digital wellness culture, she set a rule in the library. It reinforced or articulated this value, which is spending less time using phones. She provided a deprivation experience while they were in the library and gave them something else to engage in other than screens that was gratifying. And in a way, she also institutionalized her initiative. It was something that was done once a month. So it was sort of institutionalized. If we look at the stakeholders that she involved or had to influence or who were impacted, it was students, staff, and administrators. Excuse me. So the second case study, this was the school-wide phone ban. The situation here was with this librarian, the junior high teachers, this was a junior high, and the teachers and staff were really frustrated with the problems that the phones were causing. I mean, she made it sound like they were at the end of their rope. It was just out of control. So she actually united a large group of them and led them in expressing to the administration their wish to implement a no phone policy at the school to address these terrible problems they were having. And she said that the principal would agree to it, but only if they were able to get buy-in from parents. So she had a really, I felt very, creative approach to doing this. So she had this insight that the way to do this, so that the channel through which she could get parent buy-in was the district-wide student handbook committee. So every year there was a handbook committee, and they would improve a centralized, district-wide school handbook, and then each school would take that core handbook and adapt it for their school. And so she got on this committee, which included parents, teachers, and staff. And the reason she had this insight that the handbook was the way to go with this is that the handbook previously had banned phones, and then at some point a few years before, the handbook was changed to allow phones. So she knew that if she could get the district level handbook to change the language so that it was optional for the schools, that each individual school could decide whether they wanted to ban phones, that would give the principal the latitude to implement a phone ban. So that was her goal, was to get on this committee and then push to change the clause on smartphones. and she did that. She was able to do that. So a group of parents were involved in the committee. She could go back to the principal and say, we accomplished this. You can implement a phone ban at the school. And she said signs of success after they implemented the ban. Student behavior improved dramatically, she said. She said parents some were actually frustrated at first, but eventually they were mostly thankful for the ban, and because of its positive effects. And then they actually were happy also that because phones weren't allowed, parents who had their kids going into 6th grade had cover for saying, no, I'm not going to buy you a phone because you don't need one for school. So if we look at her level of impact, this is, way beyond just her responsibilities as a librarian. She had an impact at the school community level. And she hit some of the same areas that the previous case study did. She basically implemented a rule, school-wide rule, which obviously required the articulation and reinforcement of values. It provided kids with the deprivation experience, so while they're at school, they couldn't use their phones. And it also served to sort of institutionalize this virtue, right? It became a school-wide rule that was in the handbook, and it was institutionalized at that school. And she impacted all the stakeholders: students, staff, administrators, and parents. So that's the end of the presentation. I just want to summarize here the key points. So digital addiction, it's causing excessive phone use among kids. And it's the excessive phone use that's hurting them on multiple levels: social, emotional, cognitive, etc. And schools can help to address this problem by creating what I was calling a digital wellness school culture. Librarians can play a valuable leadership role in forging this digital wellness school culture. And they can do this by leading initiatives that either lie within or outside of their job responsibilities. And just a reminder that, you have to be strategic in influencing relevant stakeholders to optimize your effectiveness. So that is the presentation. And if anyone has any comments or questions, you can feel free to email me, or if you need to, call me. But there's my email address, michael.mercier@screeneducation.org. I want to say I really do appreciate the opportunity to share this with you, and I hope you found it helpful. Thank you very much.